From 2004 to 2007, my best friend Katie and I worked at a small, family owned seafood restaurant in Winchester Bay, Oregon. In 2006, we were invited by the cook and a small group of regulars to come to a bonfire on the bay to watch the fireworks with them on the 4th of July. Thinking it sounded interesting and having no other plans, we agreed to come. Upon arrival, we find the boys drinking next to a huge fire situated on a large clearing-type strip of grass. There are a ton of regulations about burning in Oregon because of the risk of wildfires that can burn out of control very quickly. So this huge grassy area was perfect, especially since they had secured a fire pit before lighting anything. This grassy stretch was surrounded on three sides with dense thickets of evergreens. There was one wide, clearly defined trail that led through the trees to the water's edge and a gravel parking area behind us. Being 20 years old, we weren't supposed to be drinking, but we didn't know these men that well. We decided to stay sober and just enjoy the fire and the upcoming show in the sky, just in case they started acting inappropriately. After chatting for a bit, the guys decide they want to partake in an herbal smoking session. Katie and I say no thanks, and the boys head off into the trees to puff the chiba. Katie and I are standing alone by the fire, just vibing and enjoying the evening. Suddenly I get this strange sensation, and my eyes keep wandering to a specific area of the tree line. It's a crawling sensation which I'm trying to ignore, but I can't help myself. I just keep glancing over. After a minute or two, an older woman comes walking out of the trees. She was not on or near the trail. This tiny woman had walked through an area of thick undergrowth in the pitch black. She was short and looked frail, although it was hard to tell as she was dressed in layers of raggedy long skirts or dresses and had several shawls or blankets wrapped around her shoulders, like a human rag bag. She was hunched over and walking slowly, as if she were older and her joints were bothering her. She was a little over 100 yards away, and it was twilight, so I couldn't make out her face or features. Just her outfit, which, not gonna lie, was pretty creepy. Figuring she was a homeless person who deserved some respect and sympathy, I tried not to stare. However, when I looked over at Katie, she was watching this woman too. The woman had a force or vibe about her that made it hard not to watch her. She gave off the feeling of a wild animal in your house, when you know it's probably not too dangerous, but you have to keep your eyes on it just in case it becomes aggressive before you can get it out, if that makes sense. A feeling of unease that I kept trying to shake. Katie turns to me and asks me if I'm seeing this. I reply yes, she's probably just a homeless person, poor lady. Katie responds by telling me that the woman has given her a weird feeling, and it makes her skin crawl to the point that Katie feels she shouldn't look away. This validation of my misgivings is not comforting. Katie and I stand in silence, watching the woman make her slow, tottering way along the tree line to our front left. I'm still feeling bad for staring, and I'm going through all the reasons in my head that I'm an idiot for worrying about a decrepit grandmother, even if she does look like a stereotypical witch. Suddenly, the woman comes to a complete stop. Until this moment, she'd been looking at the ground. She now stops, raises her head, and looks directly at us. A feeling of dread immediately hits me in the gut. My stomach drops. Her look feels malevolent, even though I still can't make out facial features in the dusk. Then, no shit, this woman raises her left arm and points straight at us, while letting out the most blood-curdling screech I've ever heard in my life. I think my heart stopped beating for a second. Then, and I will have this image in my head until the day I die, right in front of her pointing finger, a silhouette of a human made of what looked like black mist coalesced. A shadow person, the first one I'd ever seen. I don't know if it just appeared, or if it actually came from her body. I barely had time to register what I was seeing, before the thing flew towards us. It moved so incredibly fast that it blurred and covered about 300 feet in less than 3 seconds. This thing passed directly between me and Katie, on my left and her right. It literally blew my hair back over my shoulder on that side when it rushed past us. We spent several seconds in complete shock, staring at each other with bloodless, pale faces. Simultaneously, we both turned to look at the woman. She was no longer looking at us or acknowledging us in any way, but we had picked up her pace and she was doing a hobbling sort of run in the direction she had originally been headed, eyes on the ground. Katie and I stood in silence, each afraid we might have just gone mad. At first, I was afraid to even ask her if she'd seen that thing, but looking at her face, I knew she'd seen something. She finally asked if I'd seen what she just did, because she wasn't sure if it was real. We compared notes and realised that we had both witnessed the same thing. When I started freaking out about the fact that this thing had been real enough to blow my hair back, she admitted that while she did not experience her hair moving, she had seen my hair blow back as she turned her head to watch it move between us. I have no idea who that woman was, or what she went after us. It looked like a shadow person. Who knows what they even are? Never in my life have I ever heard of a shadow person doing a living person's bidding. Now, I've looked into it after this experience. I've never seen her again, and I surely never want to. This experience has bothered me for years, and so I bring it to the internet to find out if anyone else has ever witnessed a shadow person and a living person working together. Or at least get some theories as to what the hell happened that night. I think we saw the shadow thing once more a couple nights later, but it didn't have a human shape that time, so I'm not sure if it was the same entity. But the timing seemed too coincidental. The web. AOL software upgrades arrived in the mail on a CD-ROM. Family members shouted across the house at one another if an incoming call on the landline interrupted the painstaking 10 minutes it took to get from the America Online sign-in screen to hearing "You've got mail" reverberate throughout the room. Recipients of multicoloured chain emails. A serial killer camping out in a young girl's shower and killing her guard dog. Truly pondered the threat against their luck for the next 7 years if they didn't abide by the messenger's command to forward it onto 7 friends. Better not risk it, we told ourselves, as we quickly typed out 7 email addresses in the recipient field. And finding everything there was to know about a person online, something anyone can do today with a few keystrokes and a credit card, was a lot harder to do back then. But not for Corey. I was 15 years old at the time. Ambiguous and exotic usernames like Pina Colada 33 or Brunette Baby 87 were all the rage. Naive as we were, early screen name pioneers, this anonymity was smart. Social media was in its infancy. Sangha was the go-to haven for teens and tweens to vent their angst while informing the world that they were currently listening to Screaming Infidelities by Dashboard Confidential. Everyone was friends with Tom on MySpace. AIM didn't exist as a standalone messenger service yet, so it was MSN Messenger or bust. But if you had a true AOL account like I did, you were set up with all you needed to discover this new, hyper-connected, free-for-all world of the early 2000s World Wide Web. Your own email inbox, a new page to create a personal profile, access to chat rooms on just about any topic or hobby you could possibly imagine. It was exhilarating, until it was terrifying. One afternoon, I jumped into one of these chat rooms. ASL 16F Boston. I watched the usual exchange between total strangers scroll across my screen for several minutes hoping to find my opportunity to finally chime in and introduce myself. Ultimately, I got bored and left the chat without saying a word. Bleep. An instant message appeared on my screen. You didn't say anything, the message said. Why not? Who is this? I responded, confused by the username I didn't recognise. I'm Corey, he responded. I'm 16, 8th grade in Lake Charles, Louisiana. What about you? 16 and in 8th grade? Yikes. And yet, I was intrigued. So, you get held back twice or what? I teased. And so the conversation began. We struck up a brief online friendship that afternoon. He shared a photo. Freckled face, brown hair. Nothing I'd rate above a 5 on hot or not. Yet despite the friendliness, I refused to tell him where I was from, or anything personal about me beyond my first name and age. I knew little about the dangers of the internet, but I wasn't dumb either. My username was a fruity drink and some numbers, right? Safe enough, I figured. For background, I did have one of those AOL user profiles. Its standard features included a profile picture and a questionnaire to fill out fun facts about yourself. My photo was one of me with several friends, with no indication of which one was me whatsoever. A few days later, Corey messaged me out of the blue. You're beautiful. What? Brunettes with green eyes, man, he responded. Somehow, despite my photo containing 3 other friends, he'd accurately identified me. I would love to see you sometime. I felt my skin prick. I politely told him something to the effect of that not being possible, and quickly logged off. Friday the following week, I was sleeping over at my best friend's house. I was logged into my account in the background as we thirstily browsed cute guys on Hot or Not. Bleep, who's messaging you? My friend asked. I knew. It was Corey. Hey, you live in Houston. Your parents are James and Sarah Miller, and you live at 1655 South Grand. City, names, and address obviously changed, fabricated. You know that feeling when you're on a roller coaster during a sharp drop and your heart jumps into your throat? That was that moment. Fortunately, we managed to find out AOL did, in fact, have a block user feature that night. That was it. So long, creepy 16-year-old middle schooler with scarily good online sleuthing skills. It didn't last long. The next day, a screen name similar to Corey's messaged me. He had another account. I quickly blocked it. This happened 5 more times. I finally went dark for a while. Sure, I missed the thrill of seeing the yellow envelope appear in my virtual mailbox, but it was better than the threat of being harassed by Corey. A few weeks later, I got home from school. My little sister was a baby at the time, 14 years my junior. So she had a nanny who stayed with her during the day while my parents were at work. When I walked through the door of the kitchen, she handed the phone to me. It's for you, she said with a quizzical look on her face. Who is it? I really don't know. Some boy with a twang in his voice. Sounds like he's from East Texas or Louisiana. Oh, God. Hello? I finally muttered into the phone. Hey, pretty thing. It's Corey. Hey, so my friends and I are all into the show Jackass. We're thinking of making a trip over to Houston and doing some pranks around town next week. How hilarious would it be if we surprised you at your front door? I choked out a nervous laugh. I mumbled an excuse about having a quiz the next day and quickly hung up. For the next few weeks, I slept with a knife under my mattress. I was absolutely terrified I'd wake up to this Lake Charles stranger boy on the balcony outside my window. How did he get my phone number? But just as soon as he'd invaded my sense of security, he seemingly disappeared. No instant messages, no uninvited calls to my home. The knife finally went back into its respective kitchen drawer. 2 months passed, and it felt gloriously safe. Until the phone rang the first week of summer break. "Hi," the voice said curtly. "Who is this?" I politely demanded. "It's me, Corey." Let me be clear, this was not the same voice I'd heard 2 months ago. This was dripping in southern syrup. It was young and full of mischief. This new voice was different. It was cold. It lacked any discernible accents. It was older. I was speaking to a grown man. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to talk to you," he hurriedly blurted. Why did he sound rushed? "I feel terrible, but the police came to my house. They took my computers away from me. I can't say why, but don't worry, I'll come to Houston soon." Click. That was the last day I used that fruity username. I deleted that account and created a new one. I embarrassingly told my parents I'd made a huge mistake, despite having shared nothing that could have easily revealed my personal identity. Even if I had, the threat back then wasn't what it is now. That was nearly 20 years ago. People simply didn't have the online presences that they do today. As a teenager with no social media yet, I was virtually a ghost. But still, I was convinced I was somehow culpable for this stranger, this man, predator who clearly had advanced knowledge of computers and the internet, singling me out and making it his mission to learn everything about me, through whatever means possible. He was determined to get me. I'm only grateful that even at 15, I knew better than to trust that this freckle-faced kid from an online chat room had fully benign intentions. 2 decades later, I still wonder where Corey ended up. This happened to me when I was 21 after an OD suicide attempt. I woke up in the hospital in the middle of the night to a nurse saying he needed to replace my IV. He jabbed me 2 or 3 times, but doesn't even hit a vein. So I asked him if he could get someone else to try. He says no, and keeps going. As he's doing this, he's pushing and wiggling the needles around under my skin, saying he's trying to get the vein. By the 7th or 8th needle, it registers that he is intentionally trying to hurt me. I ask him, "Why are you doing this?" He says, "It's your own fault you're here." I was too weak to fight back, and it was the middle of the night. There was no one else around I could call out to. I have no idea how many times he ended up puncturing me in the end. The next day, a different nurse was taking out my IV. She was horrified because she said it was the biggest needle she'd ever seen used on a living patient. Not sure why you'd use needles on a dead patient, but that's what she said. A lot of people shrugged us off when I told them about it, but it was so terrifying being alone, helpless, and knowing that the person who was supposed to care for you hated you and wanted to cause you pain. So yeah, night nurse who loves huge needles and hates mentally ill girls, let's not meet again. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor, alias. We were very crowded on our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling, old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean house, ugly house, don't like, scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behaviour was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to stress of the move. Now, this house was ramshackle as fuck, and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and until recently before we moved in, still had a working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young, broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen, since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100% lol. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents had told me it gave them the creeps. After a few months, we moved in. My mother and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning, running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mum saw thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there, and dragged me out of the water himself. Thank you, Papa. Love you. Although my mum was confused how I got so far so fast, and how I got into the centre of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim, she figured she'd underestimated me, and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door, and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mum said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mum said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss starts going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping, every baby gate is still shut and locked. But I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mum to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around and bark at my mother, wait for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost 1.5 miles out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbours. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbour's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She ploughed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tyres, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently our neighbour, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in at least one of the few thick strands of trees around. She found me in the dead centre of this thicket, just standing there, looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me, and after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was there, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here. shatting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children, and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious, and told her the ones that live with us, in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her, with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering, and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there is no way I could even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road, and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2, and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she's still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery, because whatever the fuck those things were, I really don't think they were children. Back in high school, my friends and I, 18 male at the time, would go to a sports oval after dark and smoke, drink alcohol, the usual. Loser teenage stuff. One night I hit the bottle a little too hard, and ended up spending the night passed out at the oval. I woke up still a bit drunk, and realised someone had taken my glasses away from me, so I wouldn't break them during my drunken antics. That was kind of them, but now I had to work out how to get home without my glasses. This was in the era before smartphone turn-by-turn navigation for the young'uns. Thankfully, when I started walking, I saw my good friend Hannah was walking just ahead of me, identified by her long brown hair. Hannah and I live very close to one another, and we've been drinking together the night before, so I started blindly following Hannah as a way of getting home. About half an hour later, Hannah suddenly sprints down the driveway of a random house that isn't hers. I'm perplexed, but a bit more sober now, and I'm able to find my way home unassisted. Only later do I realise that Hannah was not Hannah, and just some random girl with long brown hair. So from her point of view, she was innocently walking in the early morning. Then some drunk 18-year-old wakes up and proceeds to follow her for half an hour in total silence, copying her every move. From her point of view, it was clear that I was following her. I later went back to the driveway she sprinted down to apologise, only to find that she didn't live there. So she must have just run down a random person's driveway to get away from me. I still feel bad, almost 10 years later.